News Radio Network. You're going to hear Thomas Sgovio. He's a Buffalo artist, but there's quite a story behind Thomas Sgovio. In the 1930s, he was living in Buffalo, and he became quite well known as a member of the Young Communist League. In fact, very frequently could be found speaking to small crowds at McKinley Square or just about anywhere where a crowd would gather. Here is an item from an editorial dated May 5th, 1930 in the Buffalo Times. It referred to Tommy Sgovio as, quote, a pretty nice boy into whose head somebody has put some rather fuzzy ideas. And then it added, all young people should be critical of the institutions their elders hand to them, but few of them are. Yet before Tommy can be intelligently critical, he will have to spend many more years at school. He will have to see more of the world and know more about it. Shortly after that, his father was deported. He left for the Soviet Union. Tommy and his family followed shortly after that. Thomas Sgovio spent the next 2 decades in the Soviet Union, and nearly a decade of that time imprisoned in Stalin's Gulag.
The Communist Party, through its auxiliary organization called the International Labor Defense, paid our way, and really they sent us there. I went with the understanding that I was going to study art for 4 years and then return. I had just graduated from Tech High School, and yeah, I was excited because I thought I was going to get an art education. But I knew even if I wanted to, I couldn't remain. I shouldn't have remained there because being a member of the Young Communist League, it was considered bad for a communist to go to and live in the Soviet Union, because then who would remain here to fight for the revolution?
Yeah. Not being a member of the party, though, you weren't allowed to do what you really hoped you would be able to do, to attend an art school.
Well, I wasn't able to get into a full-time art institute, but I did study in evenings. There was a gallery called the Circle Hudojnik, and then I found work as a commercial artist, and I worked 2.5 years and studied at the same time in the evenings.
Did you at that point then begin to feel that you wanted to leave the Soviet Union? Is that what led you to the U.S. Embassy and eventually your arrest?
Yes, well, I was, all of us, my mother and my sister and I, we all became homesick, I would say, a few months later because, well, we saw a lot of things which we did not understand at the time. We became disillusioned, but you see, we lived there as political immigrants. And there are many things which we saw. Our guides from the International Labor Defense told us that it was all we're undergoing temporary hardships, and that in 20, 30 years everything was going to be rosy. But what led me, this was up until 1936, but 1937, they began to arrest everyone almost, all our friends. You see, there were a few thousand foreigners in Moscow, and I worked with foreigners, and my social life was with foreigners. There was a foreign workers club, and there was the International Club. There were Germans, there were Austrians, there were Poles, there were Lithuanians, and every day you heard of someone, so-and-so was arrested, so-and-so was arrested. We didn't understand what was going on. And so I went to the American Embassy and I wanted to go back.
It was on that first visit, literally, wasn't it, that you were apprehended?
No, I went, the first time I went in January, and I applied in January for my American passport, and I filled out an affidavit, and the first secretary, McKee, his name was McKee, told me they were going to write to the People's Commissariat of External Affairs, which is equivalent to our State Department, to find out how I had become a Soviet citizen. And when they received an answer, they would call me. But it was on my second or third, I believe, the third, in March 21st when I returned, because I was impatient, because 5 days before my neighbor had been arrested, and I witnessed his arrest, and I thought, well, every night they were going to come to me, so I went to the American Embassy, and as soon as I left, I crossed the street, and I was arrested.
Were you charged? Were you told why you were arrested at all?
No. They put me they brought me to the militia station, where there were about 50 others, all Soviet citizens who had been detained as they left various other embassies, and then at night they put us in threes, in parties of threes. They put us in limousines and took us to the Lubyanka prison, and I was held there 3 days and 3 nights, and I was called, and then I was told I was arrested, and they sent me to prison.
You hadn't spoken out against the party
No.
in Moscow, had you?
No.
Can you think of any reason why you would have been?
Well, I know the reason now. I know at that time they were just arresting. It was the purges of 1937-38. Mr. Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago estimates that 6 million people were arrested during those years.
Just people who were perceived by Stalin to be a threat?
Well, I don't really believe he knew we weren't threats. I think there were several reasons. The industrialization of the country was taking place. They just needed free slave labor to send to Siberia. There were many places which were being opened up where free citizens would, like where I was in Kalima, where it gets to 95 degrees below zero. Who's going to go and work there free? So they just rounded us up and sent millions, literally, in all these industrialization projects. That was one reason. Another reason, which I believe, and this I gather from, because I sat with many old Bolsheviks and old communist Russians, that before 1937, you see, Stalin did not have the right to arrest. He could have anyone arrested, say through the, what at that time was called the NKVD, right? Now it's called the KGB. But he did not have the right to arrest a member of the Politburo without the consent of all of them. But after the scare of 1937 and 38, they granted him this right, and he became complete master. He could have any member of the Politburo. All he had to do was just a nod of his head, and he could be arrested. It was mostly for power, and also to corral free slave labor.
So you were taken to Siberia immediately, or there were a number of stops in the 9.5 years of your imprisonment?
Well, yes, I was in Taganka prison in Moscow up until June, where I was interrogated once or twice, and then they called about 1,000 of us into a big hall, and they were all, my fellow prisoners were called, about half of us, they called half of us, and we were notified that we were sentenced to 10 years to 8 years under the letter articles of the criminal code. But I wasn't notified, and about half of us weren't notified. We only found out, I found out in the cattle cars as I was being transported to Vladivostok. I was sentenced to 5 years as a socially dangerous element. It was a huge camp, transit camp. We estimated there were about 80,000 prisoners there, and they were awaiting shipment. We were being sent to Kolyma, and since there is the only means to get there is either by boat or by air, and to this day there's no railroad that goes to Kolyma. We were put on ships, and after a 6-day journey we arrived in Magadan, Bukhta Nagaeva, it's called.
It was 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, hard labor?
At work?
Yeah.
Yes.
In a 12-month winter, literally.
Well, they had a song which the old-timers made up a little rhyme, which went, Kalima, Kalima, wonderful little planet, 12 months of winter, and then comes summer. But there's a certain grain of truth in it, because in Magadan, really, there is no summer, but in the interior, there is a short, hot summer. It's a very, very hot summer. But the winters are much colder.
What was going on, or what were some of the things going on in your mind, being so far from Buffalo, and in many ways having no control over what had happened? You hadn't had much choice in following your father after his deportation, and then the arrest, seemingly groundless.
Well, for the first year or so, I thought it was all a mistake, not only myself. See, then I found out something else, because when I was arrested, I thought they were arresting all the foreigners, because most of us were charged with espionage. But then, in prison and in the cattle cars in Vladivostok, I saw that the bulk of most of these, there were very few foreigners, they were all Russians, Ukrainians, because, you know, the Soviet Union is made up of many nationalities, and that these were the people, and here they were old Bolsheviks, old communists, and all of them, I'm sure, I knew they were innocent. They all thought the same as I did. We thought it was all a mistake. We thought well, there were two theories. One was that there were really enemies, because before our arrest there had been this constant propaganda campaign in the press and over the radio, where they found so many spies and saboteurs, and that the enemy had infiltrated. There were so many enemies, and so they were just arresting all of us. They were going to check us out, and then maybe in 3 or 4 months they were going to release us. And the second theory was that Stalin didn't know what was going on, that the enemies had infiltrated the ranks of the NKVD, and that once he found out, we would be freed. But then after a year or so, as I began to talk with the Russians, my companions, I saw the people die, I found out that this wasn't just happening now, that it had been happening since 1918, as soon as the communists got into power. And then I began to pray first I lost all my enthusiasm for communism, and there was nothing around me just like a drowning man clutches at a straw. So I began to pray to the stars, and then after that I just found myself praying to God. And
so many died.
Yes.
How did you survive?
Well, I've been asked that so many times, and there are various reasons. There are many reasons, because my first 6 years I was on general work, and then it always seemed that something would happen. And you see, I was a sign painter, so they would take me and put me in as a sign painter. First year, the criminals saved me, because I was a foreigner, because I was very, very young. I was only 21 when I was arrested, and they sort of felt sorry for me. And there were so many Russians who, amongst the trustees, even amongst the officials, who had never seen an American, and they were interested. They would ask me, if you're from America. They never saw an American. Have you ever been to Niagara Falls? And is it true that in New York City, the moving sidewalks? And so they would give me like a soft job. Then again, I would be transported somewhere else. And for the first 6 years, it was just a period of ups and downs, ups and downs. And then when I found God, I believe, I think that was a big factor that saved me. And also I think I had a streak of stubbornness, that when I saw these people die, when I saw the guards shoot and kill people, I made a resolve that I wanted to come back to Buffalo because I wanted to talk to those old communists and members of the Young Communist League and let them know what it was really like in the Soviet Union.
What are some of the events that led to finally your being released?
Well, I had a 5-year prison sentence, but my term expired in 1943, and because of the war, they didn't free me, they didn't free the politicals, so I was a prisoner for 8.5 years. And I was freed in 1946, and then in 1948, when I had a sister in Moscow, I believe that's the reason they released me, because my sister and my mother, constantly wrote petitions, and then I don't know, I was working as a free citizen in Usnyera. It's the coldest continually inhabited place in the world, at the northern tip of Kolyma. I was called in the personnel department and told that I could leave. And so I gathered all my possessions, I went to Magadan, and then they told me it was a mistake. It was just like they were, draining the blood out of me. Then they would give me hope, and then they would dash it again. And so I had to go back. And then, that was in 1947, the first time I went to Magadan. Then in 1948, I was given the second time they gave me permission. And I left. I left just by miracle.
You immigrated to Italy before returning to the United States, is that correct?
Right.
Because your mother was Italian?
Yeah, because my mother was Italian, because relations with the United States were very bad. The Cold War was going on, and it was Khrushchev got into power. There was a liberalization period. So we figured it would be better to apply to Italy. We'd have more chance.
And then you returned to Buffalo.
Yes.
It must have been a welcome sight.
Yes, it was. I thought I'd never get here.
And there must have been many changes.
Oh yes, there's a lot of changes.
And you had a critical message to tell people.
Yes. But unfortunately, people don't want to listen. And I don't know. Well, they couldn't believe me. When I tell them that they sent us to Kolyma where it was 95 degrees below zero, they said it's impossible. A person can't exist there.
And certainly more to tell that no one would want to believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to God, now after Solzhenitsyn wrote his Gulag Archipelago, people are beginning to realize that it is true. And then other survivors have also gotten out and written, so there's confirmation.
Yeah.
Because if I were to come alone and say that, it'd be just like I came from another planet. Probably wouldn't believe it, but...
How do you feel about détente and improving relations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union?
Well, I was born in the communist movement. My father became a communist, a socialist, when he was 1917. And I hear so much talk about it. It's all so confusing, but you never hear it mentioned that the Soviet Union, the communists, their first aim, their first and only aim is to destroy Western society, to destroy capitalism and implant the communist flag in our land. So, I mean, well, if we're so gullible and we're on our knees praying that they'll change, and I think that détente was just a strategy. It's just a strategy. Soviet Union needs our technology. They always needed it, our equipment, and we give it to them.
Many people would want to bury, or maybe a better word would be to erase those memories you've painted and preserved many of those memories.
Yes.
Why not just try to forget?
Well, I tried. So in the beginning, I was so disillusioned, and everyone told me to forget. But it seems to me that, like I hear a voice, there's something inside of me which says, even though I sometimes feel it's useless, but I just cannot forget. It wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to my father, who died, who after serving 10 years in Vorkuta, made my mother, I did not see him, but he made my sister and my mother promise that we would do all in our power to tell the world. It wouldn't be fair to those Soviet people back in the camps who saved me, who, because I was an American, because they said that maybe by some miracle someday you'll return and let the world know about Kolyma. It wouldn't be fair to them, it wouldn't be fair to myself.
You have been working on a book as well.
Yes.
Is that about to be published? Are you looking for a publisher? Is it complete?
It's in the process of being printed.
It will be out within a few months, maybe?
Yes, within a month and a half, I hope.
You're exhibiting in Buffalo now. We want to mention that. An exhibition of Buffalo landmarks that are on display at the convention center. And you work in Buffalo now for Chevrolet, for General Motors.
Yes. In the River Road plant.
As kind of an in-house artist for some of the things that...
I'm a plant layout man. I do the artwork, plant artist.
And this exhibit at the convention center is, I guess, pretty self-explanatory, Buffalo landmarks.
Yeah. Well, as soon as I came back, see, I mean, it was, I was born and raised on the west side, so I went out and painted those buildings which were so dear to me, which I thought I'd never see again.
Did you remember things in Buffalo just as clear as if you had
Yes.
walked the streets the day before?
Yeah, I was surprised that, well, of course, there were changes, but a lot of the places, like the house that I first remember was still there, although they did demolish it now.
I find that the paintings, they're very powerful. There's one that I'm looking at now as we speak that makes me cold to look at.
What's it, chopped hands? Or the other one?
The man bundled in old blankets and scraps of cloth sewn together to provide some warmth.
Yes, some people, when they see my figures there, they say, gee, they look fat and they look pretty husky, but, they wore collective underwear, and we didn't have any blankets, we didn't have any mattresses. We slept on bare sleeping platforms. We had to take everything with us, and if anyone did happen to find a piece of blanket, we would wrap it around ourselves underneath because it was so cold.
I see the dates on some of the paintings, 63, 67. Do you still, from time to time, remember and paint?
Yes, I do it little by little, whenever I get time. Of course, I'm raising a family, and it's pretty hard.
And you met your wife in Italy before coming back?
Yes, yes, I met my wife.
And you have a family now in Buffalo?
Right.
It's an amazing story, and as an interviewer, I feel inadequate sometimes when I talk with someone to try to say I understand, because I don't think I can. I can be sensitive, but I can't really begin to place myself in the places you've been.
Yeah, well, it's amazing that Kolyma, I would estimate that at least 6 million people have died there since it was opened in 1932. And that was a territory so vast, and Americans don't know about it.
It's not on the government tour, is it?
No. I mean, everyone has heard of Auschwitz and Buchenwald, but Kolyma, and at the end of my book I wrote that someday future Russian generations will ask that Stalin and the present rulers, Soviet rulers, will have to answer to the Soviet generations because of what was perpetrated in Kolyma, and that future American generations will also ask us, why is it we knew about Auschwitz and Buchenwald and knew nothing about Kolyma?
Thomas Sgovio, thank you for sharing this with us.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Final edition will continue after this.
On weekends, WEBR News Radio 970 tends to relax as you relax. We change our style.